This is where I get my persistence. I went to that mayor's office, Ray Bertrand, 4 times. And the 4th time, my partner Richard is the one that made me go back that last time. You sit in that chair out in the lobby until he'll talk to you, and you get him to talk to the mayor up in Greenville. And so I sat there, and when he came out of the office around 6, he was mad. Why won't you leave me? I told you no. I said, sir, please, wouldn't you just call this mayor and talk to him about what happened in Greenville? It's a much smaller town, but you need to hear his story. Then if you still don't like it, we'll quit. But try one more time. And he called the mayor and talked to him for 15 minutes. And he said, come back and see me tomorrow at 10.
We'd like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. B1 Bank knows that entrepreneurs like you are always thinking one step ahead. So you need banking solutions that can keep up. It begins with lending. Does your business need working capital or financing for new equipment? How about a real estate or a construction loan? Good news, the B1 lending team is ready to learn your goals and help you find the best lending option available. Now let's talk about uncomplicating your daily cash flow. B1 offers a full array of treasury management services that let you collect funds faster, pay funds more efficiently, and access your information with powerful online tools. Most importantly, B1 understands the value of working with local nonprofits to build a stronger community. They believe in giving back through hands-on involvement with their B1 Community Outreach Program because it's simply the right thing to do. B1 Bank. Be uncomplicated. To learn more, visit b1bank.com. Equal housing lender, member FDIC. Hello, I'm Andrew McClendon, your host of the NXT Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm here today with our producer, Mr. Daniel Sagona with Propel Productions, and happy to invite our guest, Mr. Richard Zuschlag, founder, chairman, and CEO of Acadian Companies. Richard, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So this year, you'll be celebrating your 50th anniversary of Acadian Ambulance, and that's just an amazing milestone. And there's very, very small number of entrepreneurs that can stake that claim. So congratulations.
Thank you very much. 50 years passed by pretty fast.
So can you start by telling us what Acadian Ambulance or what Acadian Companies does, and then give us some of the numbers that defines your company?
Well, Acadian Ambulance is the main part of our system. Acadian Companies is the umbrella over the new divisions that have been opened up in recent years. But the ambulance service serves about 2/3 of the state of Louisiana, about half the state of Texas, a couple of counties in Mississippi, and 1 county up in Tennessee. But that's the main company that we got started with back in 1971. Since then, we added ATS, which is a home and business security system that has grown relatively quickly, not only here in Louisiana, but more recently across the United States, in that we've been approved to monitor a lot of video services for the federal government. We have car dealerships as far away as Boston that use us to monitor their car lots at night via video. So that's a fast-growing entity within our system. We had safety management systems for a long time. Our people would become paramedics and work for offshore oil companies to make sure that it was a safe arena and that people were taken care of when they were hurt many miles away from medical help. And that now has expanded more into industrial medicine and has played a major role in this COVID situation we've been in for the last year. We have NIMSA, which is our training facility that trains paramedics not only for Acadian Ambulance, but other services throughout the United States. And so those are the main divisions that we have right now. Of course, our Air Med helicopter program is part of the ambulance division.
Right. So how many employees are packed in all of that?
5,000.
5,000 employees. And when you think of ambulances or vehicles, how many do you have there?
Approximately 650 ambulances and 13 air ambulance helicopters.
My goodness. I read somewhere where your vehicles travel 13 million miles each year.
It's amazing, and I think that number is quite a bit higher right now. I think it's 31 million. Maybe that's a mistake on the way they typed that out, but I think it's 31 million right now.
Okay.
I'll say that, when we first started, our first year's budget was like $186,000 for 8 Vietnam medics and 2 ambulances. Our budget this year is just a little over $700 million in terms of revenue. So it shows you the kind of growth we've had in 50 years. It's hard for me to figure out exactly how that happened. But when we first started, we were an emergency service, and we learned how to respond to emergencies in a very quick, efficient way. I love to share this story. When I was growing up, I'm the oldest of 4. I had a strict mom and dad. When my mother...
And what, you grew up...
I grew up about 60 miles north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, small town, maybe 6,000 to 7,000 people, Greenville, Pennsylvania, halfway between Erie and Pittsburgh. But when Saturday morning would be there, and I would be watching some kind of a cartoon or something on TV, and she would say, "Richard, go make your bed." She didn't mean for me to go make it in the afternoon or later that night. She wanted it made right now, 5 seconds. If I wasn't off that sofa back there making the bed, she'd come after me with a broom. And so I tell people that's why we were so good at picking up the phone and answering. Somebody needed help, we went right away.
Yeah. There's a culture of immediacy.
Yes, sense of urgency.
Yeah, sense of urgency.
Yes.
So were you entrepreneurial as a kid?
My parents taught me the value of work, and my parents worked very hard, and I lived next door to my grandpa and grandma, and they taught me a lot about working. And so throughout high school, I'd always have 2 or 3 different jobs. I used to deliver the newspapers. In the summertime on my bicycle, in the wintertime pulling a sled, and I had like a 2-mile route somewhat out in the country. And one of the things I remember is the newspaper company would come deliver the papers to my house, and I had to pay them. But then I had to collect the money from each household on a monthly basis. And sometimes some of these people wouldn't have the money to pay me, so I learned early on what accounts receivable was.
Oh, my goodness.
And I can remember one time this elderly lady, I was probably 14 years old, she couldn't pay me, and I felt so bad. And so I told the man next door, he says, "Richard, I'm going to pay for the paper for her for the next couple of months, but I don't want you to tell her. You just keep delivering it." I've never forgotten that, that he wanted to help out his next door neighbor. And those are the kind of things I think that influenced me towards trying to treat other people in a positive way.
Yeah, that's a great lesson learned at an early age.
Yeah.
There's a story I read about you, maybe a little later on, but you're painting you've got a job and you're painting a building.
Well, I like to share that story. Besides the newspaper route, I mowed lawns. I shoveled snow in the wintertime. I packed groceries at the local supermarket. And then one day at the Presbyterian church, at that time I was Presbyterian, my parents were, a gentleman asked me if I liked the audio-video system because I was helping the principal at the high school with that, and he wanted me to set up the morning church broadcast in our town. So I started doing that kind of work at the local church, and then he gave me a summer job to mow some 30 acres up on top of the mountain where the radio station was, and then he needed somebody to paint the outside of the building. So I was probably 17, and I just got my driver's license. And so I was out on a summer afternoon painting with a pair of shorts on, and one of his disc jockeys, and he got into an argument, and the guy quit and left the building. And he was an elderly man. The owner was an elderly. He came outside and asked me if I would come in and spin records. And so I was kind of shook up. And so I got my T-shirt and put it on, and then he said, "Well, you can't use your name. We have to give you a radio name." And so he suggested Dick. And so all of a sudden I became Dick Richards, DR the DJ, at WGRP in Greenville, Pennsylvania.
Oh, my God.
And I kind of liked doing it. Maybe I'd get 50 to 60 people to listen. And then as that went on, I was a pretty good sales guy.
Okay, hold on. So you went in that afternoon just to flip the records, but then you kept doing it?
Yes. And so I had to do country and western when they were on vacation. I had to do rock and roll in the afternoon. I had to do the news on Saturday morning. I can remember one time he had a number of church tapes. They would be audio tapes. The station would collect $35 to $50 to run that tape in the first hour in the Sunday mornings. And one Sunday morning I slept in, and he got a hold of my dad. I got quite a bit of trouble for being late for work. I've never been late since then. That taught me the importance of being timely and being on time. I might go a little bit overboard on that with my family. They think there's something wrong with me because I like to always be early for everything I go to. But that was a good experience for me to learn at an early age. You have to be responsible and be on time.
So how long did you work in the actual radio station?
You know, I did that part-time for about 5 years because one of the things that happened is I sold some high school football games for them, some high school wrestling. In the summertime, I would go 30 or 40 miles away to a small community that was listening to that station and sell the businesses on us broadcasting live from their park and get people to come to town to buy things at all their stores. And so I was pretty good at that. And he decided to pay me 10% of everything that I earned for the station. And the way he did that is he wrote a tuition check out from the station to my college, which was a blessing because I wasn't paying any taxes on that at the time. It was a very important to me as a way of helping me get through school. And I wanted in the beginning to be a broadcast engineer for television and radio. That was one of my goals. And so I became, after the second year of school, FCC-rated broadcast engineer. And so that would save him money by having me be up at the radio station at night to be the engineer and the announcer.
Oh,
you see? So that helps him out, and it also helped me out.
So it was during that time when you're working as a DJ where you saw that model of the subscription model for ambulances or membership model? Is that how that?
What happened was this. The little town of Greenville ended up with no ambulance service. The funeral home quit providing it. And you have to think back in those days, and it also happened when I first started out in Lafayette too, but in the early days, funeral homes got $25 to take a sick person to the hospital and $2,500 to do a funeral. There was not much economics involved in the ambulance operation. And so funeral homes would not put an attendant in the back. They would just have a driver. So, you know, I share this with you now. I know it'll be covered later, but in Lafayette, when I first started, I found a memo from a funeral home that's now out of business. And it said, because there would be 3 or 4 funeral homes all racing to the car wreck, when you get to the wreck, let the other ambulance companies take the live ones to the emergency room, and you bring the dead bodies back to the funeral home.
Oh, my God. Because they got $2,500.
Yes. So you see.
Or they, in other words, they could take them to their funeral home.
To their funeral home, yes.
Oh, my
So
goodness.
That wasn't really the way it should have been run. Now, that was more in the country than in the cities, but I'll just say that was something that alarmed me. But at any rate, so back in Greenville, they asked me if I would do a live broadcast from the local bank to explain to people in Greenville what the membership program was about. So the owner of the ambulance company and the mayor came and sat there and talked about the fact that we were such a small town, unless there was some subscriptions to cover the cost of the standby service, Greenville would not have an ambulance company. And this company from up in Meadville was going to put a full-time ambulance down in Greenville. And the memberships were $15, and the way you could get them was to go to the bank and pay for the membership at the bank. Wow. And it was very interesting how that all worked. And they wanted to have a couple more broadcasts, and the mayor was asking the radio station to do that as a community service. In those days, broadcast stations had to have government, particularly county commissioners or police jury members or mayors, write letters saying that the station was helping the community. It was doing what it was supposed to do with its FCC license. So my boss was not real happy because he was providing this time for free, right, trying to get this private ambulance company memberships so that they could have an ambulance service in Greenville and take care of the mayor. And so I can remember people wanted to call me on the phone and ask questions, and we didn't have the money to have one of those fancy delay machines, tape machines. So he had me construct a system with these two MPEX recorders where we recorded the broadcast here and played it back on this one over here. And if there'd be somebody say something inappropriate on the phone, we could cut it off.
Gotcha.
We had a button to shut that off. Problem was, when I started that program out, there was a 20-second delay, but because the machine on the right was playing it back slower than the one on the left was recording it, there was a 2.5-minute delay. And I was afraid somebody could trip on that tape on the floor and cut the thing off. I've never forgotten how shook up I was on that first broadcast, but that allowed me to learn how he was operating that membership and why they had to have the membership and what it included and what it did not include.
Now, at that time, you're just storing that info, right?
Yes, I didn't have any idea I would ever do anything with it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, so from there you went to college. You went to school in D.C., right?
Yes, Capital Institute of Technology, which was an electrical engineering school, which I ended up in the end with a 4-year degree with electrical engineering, BSEE. And my goal was to be a broadcast engineer. That's really what I wanted to do.
Which all started back from the church
Steel, the radio station, selling time, understanding broadcast industry. I kind of liked all that. Yeah. And, you know, as I say, that was a small town radio station. You know, in the daytime it was AM, FM. At night, when it got dark, it would just be FM. And the boss, he loved classical music. And he would make me fill in at times at night for Symphony Hall, which I hated. And I can tell you right now, I don't think I ever had more than 5 people listen at one time. Whereas in the daytime, I could get 50 to 100 people to listen.
Yeah, that's funny. So out of school, out of college, who did you go to work for at that point?
Well, you know, I did a number of interviews, and I was somewhat concerned about the Vietnam War, and I didn't know what my lottery number was going to be. And one of these gentlemen...
What year would that have been?
That was 1970.
Okay.
So the gentleman from Baltimore with Westinghouse Space and Defense Center was recruiting, and he and I talked. He said, if you come work for me, I can get you a drafted for a job. And I've never forgotten that. That's kind of something I thought, well, I don't have my lottery number. Baltimore's not that far away from Washington. I could go do that for a while, maybe go back to the radio station. I had in my mind that maybe I would one day try to buy that radio station and live back in my hometown. That was one of my goals I was going to try to do. And Westinghouse was an interesting company, but they were going through a transition with President Johnson in that they were trying to tap into more of the government's social programs and not so much of the technical programs. And I didn't take long for me to figure out that I became an experiment for Westinghouse, where they wanted me to go off to Louisiana and do high school training for employees to get them into a hospital to be able to do the basic work as a housekeeper, as a nurse's aide. And that's what they wanted me to go do. I had that choice of either going to Lafayette, Louisiana, or going to Saudi Arabia. If I went to Saudi Arabia, I had to show and teach them how to install microwave systems. Now, I had never traveled very much. I was a bit naive. I'd been to Washington and Pittsburgh, and that's it. So I chose Westinghouse, and I spent 6 months there with them, and then they sent me to Lafayette, Louisiana. I got to Lafayette, Louisiana on July 22nd at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in a used Buick Skylark with no air conditioning. It was 97 degrees, and I thought I was going to die. I had very little money. I spent $380 buying one of those air conditioners you put underneath the dashboard. And that's the first thing I bought, and I lived in a motel for about 2 weeks before I found an apartment. But you know, after the first 5 or 6 months, I wasn't very happy. I was lonely. I felt like I'd come to a foreign country. The Cajuns talked funny. They ate very highly seasoned food. I had dysentery for a while, and it was like they had their children going back and forth to school in canoes, pirogues, etc. It was just a different culture for me. I can remember calling my father and telling him I was quitting my job and moving back to Greenville because my lottery number came out and it was 323. And I didn't think they would go that high up to draft me off to the war. Son, you gave them a 1-year commitment. You have to stay there, and you're not welcome to come home. We're not going to let you stay at the house. I've never forgotten that. It caused my dad and I to have a very bad disagreement.
You were very unhappy.
Yes, I was.
Initially.
Initially, yes. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if my dad and mom would have taken me back in. I often wonder that. Because in the end, I think probably God had something to do with all this, because I'm not really sure how it all really happened, but I feel very grateful that it did.
That's great. Let's pick up that story when we get back from this break from our sponsor. We would like to thank MBD Automation for their support of the NXT Entrepreneur Podcast. MBD Automation is a mechanical install contractor with a program-centric focus. So what do these guys do? They install conveyor systems, VRCs, platforms, singulators, sorters, and all sorts of other types of automated equipment. Who do they work for? They work for systems integrators, manufacturers, and end users in fulfillment centers, airports, mail processing facilities, and projects in the defense industry. MBD Automation works for numerous Fortune 500 companies across the United States and has a list of international clients that they perform work for in the U.S. as well. If MBD Automation can help you on your next project, you can find them online at mbdautomation.com. And we are back with Richard Zuschlag with Acadian Companies. So, Richard, you're in Lafayette, but you had a 1-year commitment, right?
Yes, and so what happened is I stayed there somewhat against my will, and I finished up the program. I worked both at Our Lady of Lourdes and Lafayette General as a subcontractor for the hospitals. They had gotten a great big federal grant to provide this jobs for these people, and my job was to get them their high school equivalency diploma so that they could go on and get their on-the-job training. And we finished that successfully, and Westinghouse wanted to bring me back to Baltimore. But in the second 6 months of being in Lafayette, I had an opportunity to make new friends. And the new friends introduced me to a lot of other people, and I went from not really being comfortable to liking the way of life, the family orientation, the fun. They knew how to work hard, but they knew how to have a good time. And the community I came from was more of a stuffed shirt community.
Yeah.
It was a different lifestyle that I wasn't used to. And once I got used to that, and the hospital CEO knew that I wasn't real happy, and his next door neighbor had a son that had just come back from the Marines. And we became friends, and I became roommates with him, and he introduced me to a lot of new people. He actually was one of my first partners when we started the ambulance company. And so that Cajun way of life really excited me. And so the hospital administrator, I and the roommate were looking for a way to stay in Lafayette for me. I wanted to find a job that could keep me there instead of, I wanted to quit Westinghouse and stay in Lafayette.
Wow, you fell in love with it, huh?
Yes. And the first program we looked at was trying to replicate what Westinghouse was doing through a jobs training program. We looked at a lot of different opportunities, and then, lo and behold, the funeral homes came and laid the keys to the ambulances on the desk of the mayor and the police chief and said, "We're quitting in 6 months. We're not going to provide ambulance service anymore because of the new federal regulations." This is back in 1970. We can't afford it. The mayor and the police chief president decided to go out for RFPs, and they kept asking for people to submit them from New Orleans and Houston, and nobody would submit one to Lafayette. And so I started recollecting all the stuff I had done at the radio station. I wrote to the man that owned the ambulance service and asked him to send me all that paperwork on the subscription and the membership and the whole thing, which he did. And I convinced my two friends to be my partners to start an ambulance service. And we made our proposal to the mayor. The secretary at the hospital helped me type up the formal proposal. And he said we were too young.
How old were you then?
At that time, I was 22. and Richard was 22, and our other partner, it was about 27. You're too young, and you don't have any money. And no, you can't do it. Do you know he went back out for proposals? The fire department had no money. The city had no money. The parish didn't have any money. And the second and third time, there was no replies from anybody. They couldn't find anybody to come in and suggest something. And this is where I get my persistence. I went to that mayor's office, Ray Bertrand, 4 times. And the 4th time, my partner Richard is the one that made me go back that last time. You sit in that chair out in the lobby until he'll talk to you, and you get him to talk to the mayor up in Greenville. And so I sat there, and when he came out of the office around 6, he was mad. Why won't you leave me? I told you no. I said, sir, please, wouldn't you just call this mayor and talk to him about what happened in Greenville? It's a much smaller town, but you need to hear his story. Then if you still don't like it, we'll quit. But try one more time. And he called the mayor and talked to him for 15 minutes. And he said, come back and see me tomorrow at 10. And I went back the next day. He said, well, there's no other proposal, and you're the only one that we have, and it looks to me like you're determined to make it work. We're going to give you a try.
God, what a fascinating story.
Now, here's the problem. We didn't have any money. None of us had any money. We put up $2,500. No bank would loan us any money in the community. We went everywhere. I happened to live in this apartment complex. I was the only male. I lived above a garage apartment right across from Lafayette General, and there was 34 ladies, all elderly, all widows, all with buku, much money. And they would send me to their bankers, and I thought I was going to get money. But, of course, they weren't going to co-sign, so I didn't get anywhere. In the end, we borrowed money through GMAC. We financed 2 ambulances at 16.5% interest. And so we had to sell 10,000 memberships at $15 a piece to get started. And that was very hard to do. So we went back to the mayor and said, you have to get all of the banks to collect the memberships for us. We said, that's good. I said, well, if you want us to be successful, that's what you have to do. And then you have to get these 2 TV stations, that's all they had, and the 3 radio stations to run public service announcements and do call-in programs so people will buy these memberships.
The exact model that you had
yes,
taken part in.
And the mayor said, well, he would call those people over to do that, and they were not happy because they didn't like giving us a private entity free time. And I started telling the mayor and the police chief president, tell them that you'll sign the papers that they're doing a community service. Beyond that, I want to say this. That mayor, he didn't want us in because he didn't think we could do it. But when we started saving lives and created success and other parishes started calling, he took a lot of pride that he got us started because he put his neck out on the line to get the banks, only 4 banks at the time. Now there's 32 of them in Lafayette. To get those 2 TV stations and the radio stations all to give public service announcements. Do you know, the sidebar story is that as we expanded across the state in later years, and I got my way into the Baton Rouge market with Mr. Gibbons at Channel 9 and the manships over at Channel 2, I would take their FCC applications and go get all the signatures from those rural parishes that we helped sell memberships to help them with their FCC application. They couldn't believe I would do that. I would personally go do that for them, which was doing a lot of their work to get their licenses renewed. And that's the way I made bonding relationships with stations to be able to do those live broadcasts that we used to do, because that was a lot to ask, to be able to do the live television networks for 3 days over the Labor Day weekend. You know, we would raise about $13 to $15 million in the last 3 days of those broadcasts. And I would have a lot of companies come and say, how are you doing this? And I was producing it, I was renting the equipment, and I was paying twice the spot amount for live coverage. And if they wouldn't carry it live, I wouldn't do it. I had 75 radio stations, and I had all these TV stations. At one time, we had Alexandria, Lake Charles, New Orleans, and Lafayette. It cost quite a bit of money, but we raised a lot of money. And that's what really propelled us getting this program to expand across the state. We were very blessed that we took off that kind of way because that first year, that membership money was really our money. That was our capital. Yeah. And what happened is we ran out before the year was done. And so we had to send the mail out a month early to get the memberships renewed. And then the next year, we had to mail it out 2 months early. We didn't have enough revenue to make it through the end of the year. So I met a banker, and he reluctantly decided to start loaning us some money because he realized it was important for the community. And the mayor went to talk to him to tell him that he needed to help us out. His name is Hubert Dumasio. His nickname is Red. He became the president of Guarantee Bank at one time, but he was a loan officer back then. And I want to tell you something. That man did more to help our company in 35 years than you can imagine. After he retired from banking, he got on our board of directors. But in the beginning, he watched us like a hawk. We weren't allowed to take salary increases without his permission. Now, he wasn't on our board or anything. We had to bring him financial statements every 6 months. And there was at one point after 12, 14 years that, he was giving us pretty much 100% financing, but I wasn't allowed to borrow more than $2.5 million. And I knew that, but that secretary of his didn't know that. And I got up to $3.5 million because I was growing too fast and had all these ambulances that I needed. In today's environment, I don't think bankers would be allowed to do that. We were blessed because we had a public service that was serving a community need, and you had the mayor telling the banker, you need to loan these guys some money. And I can remember when we had to raise our membership from $18 to $24, which is a 33% increase, there was a big pushback from government leaders. He called them all into his bank room. He had a big luncheon for them. He said, here's what's going to happen. If you don't give them the rate approval, they'll go out of business, and you're all going to have to take the ambulance service over. So you need to give them a rate approval, and I suggest that going forward that you put a clause in the ordinance that allows them to have a cost of living raise with a cost index each year. And if they need more than that, then they come back and ask for the approval. You don't want them coming asking for a rate increase every couple of years because it puts the monkey on your back. And he helped change a lot of that for us. And if he hadn't done that, I think those police stream members in that Acadian area would not have given us the increase, and we probably would have gone out of business.
Wow.
It's amazing the kind of things that happened. In that first year, we only had 2 ambulances, and I drove an ambulance for the first 2 years. I wasn't a very good driver. Didn't have enough room with all my medical equipment for that Vietnam medic to keep a spare tire. I was up in Shreveport and I had a flat tire. I didn't have a credit card. I couldn't get back to Lafayette. I had to get him to wire me, the banker, to wire me the money. When I got back, he chewed me out for not having I said, well, sir, I tried 3 times to get a Bank of America card here at your bank, and they wouldn't give me credit. He personally co-signed that application to get me a $400 line of credit. I don't think a banker today would ever do that. That's how much he got involved in trusting us, in working with us, and believing in us.
That is fantastic.
And I feel bad for these young entrepreneurs now because a lot of them have bright ideas, but they have a hard time getting the capital to succeed.
Right. What a great story. So, Richard, one of the things that I think has defined your business throughout the years is your investment in the development of advanced technologies, but not only for the medical side of the business, but also on the communication side of the business. And that's very obvious today, but I'm curious at what point that started.
Really the whole time. In the beginning, I thought it was a shame that the beer trucks had better two-way radios than what the ambulances had. The hospitals had no idea what was coming to them and when it was coming. And so when we got the radio systems installed and I convinced all the hospitals to buy the emergency room radio, it really improved our efficiency of having the hospital waiting for us when we arrived. I can still remember in 1980, the hospital being a little upset with us because we were bringing people to the hospital and keeping them alive, and it was taking too long for the doctors on call to come to the emergency room. And so therefore, they had to hire full-time emergency room physicians, and they thought at the beginning that that was a burden on them. I can remember the need for 911. I got the first enhanced 911 system in the state of Louisiana in Lafayette. I did that through a relationship I had with the old South Central Bell. I worked very hard on that. That's another story for another time. I was very proud of the things that we would accomplish through communications. We were the first ones to get an experimental license to transmit telemetry when the EKGs first came out and the first defibrillators. We got the first FCC license. We were the first ones to transmit EKGs through satellites on the offshore rigs when we go out to rescue people on the rigs in our helicopter. So communications from the very beginning was very, very important to me, and I had that background in the communication engineering degree I got. You know, if you have good systems, you communicate well with each other, you can be a lot more efficient.
So how much technology is in an ambulance? How much does it cost to outfit an ambulance?
Not as much as the ambulance. In other words, if an ambulance costs with the whole thing maybe around $100,000, I'm just using round figures.
Sure.
You probably put about $80,000 worth of technology in the back of it. It's gotten a lot more expensive than it was in those original years, but also there's a lot more lives being saved. It's amazing what you can do today that we couldn't do 20, 30 years ago. And we were very blessed because the physicians, the medical community, particularly in Lafayette, they liked the Vietnam medics. They liked the fact that we were above ambulance attendants and that we were saving lives. And it's that group that helped us write some of the first EMT and paramedic curriculum in the whole country. The first paramedic test, the first EMT test were given to our people in Lafayette, and we wrote half of those books in the beginning with physicians and college kids that were working with us. So we have a long history of trying to make pre-hospital care more efficient.
So I would say the other defining thing that came through in my research as far as Acadian Ambulance goes is that sense of urgency, the sense of expediency, and not only in responding to a call, but in expanding service areas.
A group of professors from University of Tennessee came to Lafayette 30 years ago, trying to find out why we were successful. And I can't remember the whole report, but I remember in the conclusion, he has taken the 911 sense of urgency approach on the emergency side of that business and put it in the business plan. And because he has efficient communications and wants everything done now, not tomorrow, is why that company has grown the way it has grown. I've never forgotten that. Now, I didn't do that knowing that that was happening, but it was happening, that I was using all the telemetry, the radio systems. Before we had vehicles, radios, not radios, but the telephones, the cellular phones, I had elaborate radio systems to all of our management where the dispatcher would have to say over, and it'd be a simplex radio, and he'd have to send the key up or down depending which party was talking. So we could make business calls to hospital executives or to sheriffs or to policemen. I worked very hard to tie state police, sheriff, police, fire departments, ambulance, hospitals, all onto one radio network. And I'll never forget the one in Lafayette when I first got it started, how excited everyone was. They couldn't talk to each other before. Somebody robbed one of the banks, and the Cairncrow police arrested them about 15 minutes later. That would have never happened if they couldn't all talk together. So it wasn't just used for medical reasons. Once you get people talking together, it's a more efficient world. If you can't talk to each other, then it's bad communication.
When you started out, what did your work week look like? How many hours, how much time did Acadian Ambulance consume of your life at that time?
Too much. It was a passion for me. I think that first 2 years that maybe I had a total of 6 or 7 weekends in a 2-year period off. I lived at the office. I wasn't married. I did everything there was to do. It was something I loved, and I'll be very truthful. I have a wonderful family, 3 children, 9 grandchildren. I wasn't good with my family those first years. I didn't spend enough time with them. My priorities were wrong, but when I look back on that, had I not dedicated my life to the building of that company, it wouldn't have happened. Now, I've made up for it in recent years, and I realize the mistakes I made, so I spend more time now with the family. But in those early years, I participated in washing the ambulances. I did the barbecues. I answered the phones. I helped pay the bills. I did everything. The first 3 months, we slept on the floor in sleeping bags. We didn't have money for beds. we only had 2 telephones, 2 lines, and whoever answered the line had to go on the call. And it was difficult because in the daytime, a lot of nursing homes would call, and nobody wanted to go to the nursing home. But at night, it would be all kinds of wrecks or fires or whatever, shootings, and that's what all those Vietnam medics lived for, was to go on the 911 calls.
Wow, that is fascinating. So from those early days and throughout your 50-year career, how has your management style changed, or has it?
It's been modified somewhat. There was a CEO in New Orleans that wouldn't let me have this big hospital contract unless I got a CEO coach, and I didn't want one. This is 15 years ago. I'm too old to be getting retrained. But he was very hard on me, and I finally got one. And it made a change for me at work and at home. And let's just say this, I'm still a taskmaster, and I'm sometimes difficult to work for, but I don't have the eruptions I used to have, and I try to be more diplomatic in drawing a line in the sand and get things done. But I'm a taskmaster, and I'm very serious about making sure that we save lives. And when we mess up and don't handle something the right way, I take that personally, and it's a hard thing for me to be a perfectionist, but you have to be in this business, but I can't be a perfectionist at home. At work, I can, but at home, it's taken me a while to learn that, and that CEO coach kind of helped me through that. So I have a lot of character defaults, but one of my best characteristics is I can sit and visit with someone and tell whether or not they'll fit into our system and be a good manager, and not just be about themselves, but be somebody that will try to bring the whole group up together. I like the team effort, and when my 2 partners decided that they wanted to get out, that things were getting difficult back in the 90s with the Medicare reimbursement, et cetera, one of the things that came to my mind through Senator John Breaux, at that time was a congressman, he wanted me to look at an ESOP, and I didn't understand ESOPs. It took me a long time to understand that, and of course I found out as I dug into that our own Senator Russell Long is the first one to write the legislation and get it passed back sometime in the late 80s. And what it does is it allows owners who want to exit the business to sell their stock to an employee trust. And then the employee trust allows employees to work and be able to receive proceeds from the trust on an annual basis that will go towards their retirement. In our case, if you put 4% of your payroll salary into your 401k, then we match it with somewhere between 8 and 10% of company stock, depending on the profitability of the company that year. So the 2 partners were able to sell their stock to the employee trust and not have to pay any capital gains tax.
So the ESOP was done in conjunction with your partners exiting.
Yes.
I see.
Yes.
Let us pick up that story on the other side of this break, and let us get a word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back. We would like to thank Modus for their support of the NXT Entrepreneur Podcast. Who is Modus? Modus is a facility services company that works in the e-commerce fulfillment industry across the United States. What do? They like to say they take it from the conveyor to the dock door. What does that mean? It means that they're building the pick stations with the cable management. They're installing guardrails and bollards. They're putting down floor marking. They're putting up aerial signage. These guys build fencing systems, shelving systems, and racking systems. They also do rack recovery for when there's rack failures. They also install dock levelers and dock doors. Modus also installs ASRS systems, which is automated storage and retrieval systems, as well as other robotics projects. They've worked for the largest e-commerce retailers in the world, and they can work for you. If you need to find Modus, you can reach them online at modusmoves.com. And we are back with Richard Zuschlag with Acadian Companies. Richard, you're talking about your ESOP. And I can remember back in those days, mid-'90s, there was a lot of that going on. I was curious how that worked as far as being a motivational tool for your employees, because now they have a sense of ownership, right?
initially it was not real strong. They didn't completely understand it. And because we had borrowed so much money to buy out the two partners to go into the trust, the banks had covenants that would not allow us to buy back the ESOP stock when they retired until the note was paid down over a 5-year period. That also slowed down our growth because we didn't have access to capital to be buying up other areas or starting up other companies. So that slowed us down a little bit. But I'll just say this, once it started catching on, it was the right thing to do. In other words, we have had one of the more successful ESOPs in the country from a financial standpoint, and it has provided a very enhanced benefit for retirement for rank and file employees. So I'll share with you that in the last probably 20 years, we've paid out about $325 million to buy back shares of people who either left the company or retired. So a medic that might make between $40,000 and $60,000 a year, depending what years you're talking about, could very easily leave with the company with $1 million to $1.5 million of company money from the stock, and $500,000 to $600,000 of their money from a 401k. I think that we did the ESOP the way the government wanted to be. Some people played tricks with it just to get out of taxes. Small groups do all kinds of things. Ours, according to Russell long before he passed away, was the true ESOP that he dreamt of, where the employees receive some of the extra money for their hard work. In today's environment, those employees that are 40 years and older are pretty much into their ESOP. I'm still having a hard time educating the younger group that ESOP is important because they would rather get a $2 raise rather than a 20% or a 15% bump in the stock. Right. They don't quite get that yet because they're not yet ready to retire. For us, for me, I like that culture because I felt bad for my dad. He worked very hard delivering milk all his life. His company didn't have a retirement program, so he has to live, or he did, he just passed away, off of just his Social Security check. And so my sister and I helped my mom and dad out. But I always determined that if I had anything to do with a business, I wanted to make sure that my employees had a good retirement program. I think I surpassed what I thought I could do. That's one of my most proudest achievements, and that is what I hope will be my exit strategy in the next 3 years, is to retire, have one of my top lieutenants take over, and leave it be 100% owned by the employees. Right now they own 80%. My family and I retain the other 20%. But I want that to be the way I'm able to exit. So I feel very strongly that this helped our company grow. It helped us maintain our management. I may be a difficult person to work for, but they don't ever leave. I'm the only one in the state that has people that are working for 45, 40, 35 years. It's unbelievable how my management has stayed with me all this time. And I think because I have that good characteristic of surrounding myself with good people, that's one of the things that's been attributable to our success.
That is fantastic. I wanted to talk about one of your good people, someone that I met through our charitable foundation. We provide adaptive bikes to children with special needs. And one of your employees, Ashley Andrews, was a medic driver, came to our awareness when she, as a single mother, adopted not one, but ultimately 2 children with special needs. Complex cases, and she reached out to our foundation, maybe through her therapist, to apply for an adaptive bike, in which we provided to her. And this was an instance where NBC Nightly News had come to our foundation to do a story on us, calling a Making a Difference episode. And they actually came on the delivery that we made at Ashley's home for her child. And I'm telling you this story because the compassion that woman had was so palpable that, you could see that she came from a culture. She was a very proud employee of yours. And you could see that she came from a culture of compassion, and so strongly that, she was able to adopt these 2 children. So it was something that was not lost on me, and I thought there's something exceptional going on in the culture of your company.
Doing 911 emergencies is a very stressful life. You're dealing with firemen, policemen, relatives, emergency room doctors, nurses. There's a lot of crisis and commotion. You have to have a calling, because it's not a high-paying job. You have to have a calling to want to help other people. I find that our people that do the best are the ones that have that compassion. They have the interest of wanting to help out their fellow neighbor. I tell you, in these storms and these hurricanes, particularly like in the more recent ones in Houston and Beaumont, a lot of the employees didn't know each other, and it's unfortunate, but the crisis brought them together in ways that it's hard to explain, to where they all start doing things to help each other out in a 2 or 3 week period where they don't have laundry, they don't have food, they don't have shelters, and they just all get together and help each other out, particularly here in Louisiana too. That's one of the things that attracted me when I decided to stay in Louisiana. It would have been hard for me to start this kind of company in another part of the country. There's something about the family and the way people help each other out in Louisiana that's very, very special. We've transferred some of that culture over into Texas, but it's been hard. Louisiana has got a very good society that cares about each other and helps each other out, and I think that's one of the things that made us successful. But we have an abundant amount of employees that have those same characteristics, and there'll be tragedies where people from out of state are hurt very badly. And I'll find those employees going back to the hospital a week later, helping them find rehab, actually spending their own money, buying gifts and clothing for their children. It's amazing the stories that we hear about that. We transport almost 700,000 patients a year. That's a lot of responsibility. And I'm blessed that we have an excellent workforce that tries to do the best job they can to make that happen. And it is a very emotional job, and I see a lot of my employees giving back to the community and adopting children, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
It is amazing. It is amazing. You had mentioned storms, and, Katrina was I was just curious to what extent, how disruptive that was to what you do.
I think it changed my life. I had just expanded 10 months earlier to New Orleans when that storm came. I was in New Orleans on the Friday before the storm, and I had taken the CEO of Tulane Hospital and of Baptist Hospital, and the 3 of us went golfing in English Turn. I was desperately trying to get their contract to provide ambulance service. The 2 of them operated the 2 main hospitals in Alexandria 20 years earlier. And they had a joint ambulance service called Senlaw Ambulance Service that I bought out. So I was friends with them, and I thought I could get their work in New Orleans. I'm not a very good golfer, but we had a good time. At the end of the course, we sat and watched the storm on Friday evening, and they argued about whether they were going to go to work Saturday or not. One of them had a boat at the hospital, and the other one didn't. I forget which one was which. And at 8:30 that Saturday morning, one of my top lieutenants called me and says, "You've got to come to Lafayette right now. The storm has changed directions. New Orleans is dangerous. You can't come on I-10. You have to come on Highway 90. And it took me an hour to get up with my wife and get going. I got back into Lafayette at 1 o'clock Saturday. And I stayed in that communications center for 18 days. It's something I'll never forget. Our people really rallied to the cause. I was the only system in the state that had two-way radio system across New Orleans. Everything else completely went out, and that was because of my engineering background. I had a backup to the backup. I actually flew a walkie-talkie over to the governor's mansion so that Kathleen Blanco could talk to the state police inside the Superdome. because the doctors were writing on tablet paper and the state police were driving the note back to the governor's mansion like the Pony Express days. It was not good. Part of the reason that our people didn't do well, I'm talking about the whole society, is they couldn't talk to each other because the water got into all the batteries of all the cellular towers, into all the main telephone systems, and there was 14 911 systems out of business for over 30 days. You couldn't use a phone. So they already didn't get along very well with those different parishes, but then when they couldn't talk to each other, it just made it that much worse. I was so desperate to get more help because my center was receiving the overflow from those 18 centers that would get, those calls were all coming to me. So I got my lead gentleman that was running New Orleans to go to the Air Force Base there and take his walkie-talkie, and we'd give him where the calls were at, and he had the Coast Guard commander directing all those helicopters around New Orleans. I can remember Congressman Bustani bringing President Bush's wife to my communications center because we were the only ones working. The rest of them were all dead. And I hand wrote a note to her husband, and I never had met either one of them. And I was trying to get Senator Breaux, I was trying to get anybody I could to get me help. I needed the military down there because our National Guard was over in the war. We needed the real help. I told the people from Fox when they were trying to get me on with Bill O'Reilly that I couldn't drive to Baton Rouge. That's where they wanted me to come to the South. I can't do that. We're in the middle of a crisis. I'm running this communication center myself. You know, I had 40 people up there answering every phone you could imagine. So finally I did a phone interview with Mr. O'Reilly. He asked me a question that would have taken 5 minutes for me to answer, and I answered it in 90 seconds. I got his attention, and I got the White House's attention, and I got a call then from Andy Card. And I said to him, you have got to tell the president to send the real military out here because the first disaster was the storm, the second was the flood, the third was going to be all these people that die inside these hospitals. And I played a part. I wasn't the main one, but I played a big part in getting the real military out there. It's something I'll never forget when, what's our general from here in Louisiana's name?
Honoré.
General Honoré. When he got there, he called me and wanted to know which hospital was first. He says, you put your best paramedic with that radio system of yours working on the roof of each hospital, and they're going to direct who gets in my helicopters. And that's the way he operated it. I've never forgotten that. My doctors that were working at the Superdome, my medics got shot at. It's the most amazing story of how people came together. I can remember sheriffs getting in my helicopter and making them fly up to 500 feet so they could personally talk to me and asking me to send them food and guns to the different parishes down there. It's something
so they could get reception?
Yes. It's just amazing to me the things that happened. And we did a lot of good things. We had some bad things happen. I won't go into that right now. But let me say, when it was all done and said, we were on a lot of committees to fix things for the future. Mm-hmm. And one of the best things that Kathleen Blanco did is she got interoperability for all radio systems in the state. So we're much better organized now than we ever were in the past. I give her a lot of credit for that. But there was a lot of miscommunication between the state capitol and Washington, D.C., and I got to know, I already knew Kathleen very well. I got to know President Bush pretty well. And when you listen to their side of the story, you can just see how bad the communication was. And some things went wrong, and I think both of them recognize that now, and they made peace before Kathleen passed away. So I feel good about that.
That's good. Richard, the stories are chilling. I mean, it's just amazing the degree that you were engaged in that disaster.
I feel blessed that the 2 ambulances and 8 employees grew to what it is because it's given me a lot of opportunities to help other people. And it's provided not just life-saving technology, but it's provided a lot of economics for our state in employing all those people and having them make a difference in people's lives.
So you've made a difference in people's lives in a huge way through your work, but you've also done that through some charitable and philanthropic projects. And I was just, as we wrap up, I was just wondering if you could touch on maybe one or two of those that are most meaningful to you?
It's changed through the years. You know, I'm a former Boy Scout, so I've always been big time into Boy Scouts. All I had was that first aid badge and first aid when I first drove the ambulance. I am a big believer in education, and I've been a lot more involved in public education as well as the Catholic high schools and elementary schools to raise money for those schools. I'm very involved with LSU, UL. Education is a big component. I love the World War II Museum in New Orleans. I'm impressed with how many people from around the world come to that museum. It's done a lot more for the community in terms of tourism than what most people realize. My dad served in World War II, and I spent a whole day with him there a couple of years before he passed away, and he was like a little kid, seeing all the things that he remembered from the war. So that's a very valuable asset to this state, and it makes us have more appreciation to what the greatest generation did to give us the freedom that we have today. And somehow we need to work at transferring that to our new generation, because sometimes it's being forgotten in the schools.
Richard, it is a great honor to have you on this podcast. You're not just a legend in Louisiana business, but you're a treasure of the United States. I mean, it is amazing what you have accomplished. It's amazing not just how many people you've touched and families that you've touched through employment, but also in the service that you've provided, and how you've made so many improvements in so many systems and the way things are done. And it's just an amazing career and a tremendous honor to have you here. So I thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my story.
Yes, sir. Thank you. You could be in business for 10 years, 30 years, or 50 years and be very successful, but not necessarily change the quality of life or effectively save lives. That's what Richard Zuschlag has done in his career. I love how he has boiled down these principles of success to a sense of urgency and an investment in technology and communication systems. Louisiana is a better place because of Richard. We are grateful for him coming on the podcast. We appreciate you watching, and we'll catch you next time. We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank, that can be found online at b1bank.com. The Next Entrepreneur is produced by Propel Productions. You can find more information at propelyourstory.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Next Entrepreneur Podcast and hit the bell for notifications. You can also follow us on social media. The links are in the description below.